Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar hosted by the Organization Development and Change Workforce Education and Development Program at Penn State. This is a monthly webinar series presented during our lunch hour. My name is Halima Hadda. I'm a PhD student in Workforce Education and Development Program at Penn State University. I will be moderating today's webinar along with my colleagues Marsha Hummel, who is a PhD student in Workforce Education and Development Program at Penn State University, and Nadia Witterton, part-time marketing specialist. In terms of the interactive format for this webinar, please use the chat features in the Zoom platform. If you have any question about the presentation, please use chat for features on Zoom. You can see the chat button at the bottom of the screen. The Q&A sessions will be at the end of the presentation. Our online Master of Professional Studies in Organization Development and Change is designed for professionals who need the skills and knowledge to effectively lead change in their organization. Furthermore, there is a Master and PhD program in Workforce Education and Development with a concentration in Human Resource Development and Organization Development. Our program has created a continuous monthly free webinar series with experts around the world. Today, we are presenting Creating Positive Outcomes with Change Management, presented by Dr. Patricia Macko. Dr. Macko's career spans over 25 plus years of organization development, talent development, human resource, consultant, and teaching. Her practitioner's career in the corporate setting started with manager of business development in the financial industry and stretches up to VP of HR and training, where she owned her HR and talent development experience. Her teaching background started at PSU University Park, where she earned her PhD in Workforce Education and Development. She currently teaches need assessment, appreciative inquiry, project management for professionals, marketing OD, and assisting data organizational diagnosis. Dr. Macko is also an independent consultant who assists organizations with HR, organization development, leadership development, and talent development efforts. For more information about Dr. Macko bio, please visit today's webinar page on Eventbrite. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speaker today. Dr. Macko, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Halima. I greatly appreciate that. I'm hoping to see some of my students actually in this presentation. One of the things I want to set the stage with is to remember that we have such a broad audience for these webinars that we have to try to decide what level we're going to speak to on these particular 1 hour webinars. So just keep that in mind. We have 1 hour to talk about change management, and there's a lot to cover. So we have to kind of really focus and hone in on what we want to say. The other thing is questions. If we could hold the questions until the end so that we at least get through all the slides, that would be fantastic. I'm willing to answer any questions after the webinar through email, so we'll still have a lot of time to discuss any questions you might have. So let's get started. The agenda for today's webinar, we will go over the objectives. We will set the stage for the importance of change management. We'll talk about the differences between project management and change management, and we'll do a little explanation on why change management initiatives fail. It's very important to give you some background on that. What types of frameworks and tools are out there that you can use to make sure that you do change management correctly and that you see the positive outcomes? We also have a list of workforce related trends, and I think those are important to understand also, and I'll tell you why when we get to that particular slide. And then, of course, we will have time for Q&A. So let's get into the objectives. The objectives for today's webinar will be to define the importance of change management, to explain the differences between project management and change management, the critical elements of change management. And when I say elements, I mean like steps that are involved. We want to build your understanding on why change management initiatives fail, build a better understanding of the importance of using the correct change management framework, because there are many out there. And then the understanding of trends in the workforce change management initiatives. One of the other things that I do when I present, my presentation style is more from the practitioner side. So I like to use true live scenarios that I've been through to kind of connect theory with real life situations or scenarios. So you'll hear me talk about a change management initiative that I went through with an organization, what we did well and what we didn't do so well, and to give you a little idea of how you can prepare better. So understanding the definitions, there's many definitions out there for project management and change management. One of the places I like to refer students to, or anyone who is learning change management, is the ProSci. So pro comes from professional and sci means science. So their website is prosci.com. You can find many, many tools and explanations, frameworks on their particular site for free. So you can do a little bit more research for yourself. But they say that change management is the application of a structured process and tools for managing the people side, very important, people side of change to achieve a desired outcome. The importance of change management is to ensure that impacted employees embrace, adopt, operationalize, and sustain the actual initiative once it's finished. And why I kind of giggle about that is this particular piece, the end piece, where you really need to make sure that the employees are adopting and operationalizing to sustain the process is very important. I've seen too many change initiatives fail after the initiative was implemented because they don't have in place the process for sustainability. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Another thing that I always like to say on this particular one is it's very important to teach people the why. There is another speaker. His name is Simon Sinek, Sinek. He has some YouTubes on explaining the why. So we'll talk a little bit more about that why in a couple of the different slides moving forward. So this chart just simply goes through, but again, it points out what are the differences? You're telling me, Pat, that there is a difference between change management and project management. So change management, like we said in the one slide, is the application of a structured process and tools for leading the people side of change. So one of the biggest differences that you will see between change management and project management is that change management gets into the humanistic side of change. Why is that important? Well, it's very important because if you can't educate the why behind a change, that's the first place you kind of will go off the rails, because if people don't know the why behind the change management initiative, you're not going to get them to follow. So the humanistic side is the first difference between change management and project management. As you see in the definition for project management here, it really is the use of specific knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to deliver something of value to people. So it doesn't have in that definition that the humanistic side is already included in setting up the actual framework or process. So it's very important to understand that. And then, and where I got that information, in case you want to dig into it, is the Project Management Institute, and specifically from they call it the PIM book, PMI book, Project Management Institute book. So that's where I got that. And it, again, the focus is on task and activities, not really heavily involved in the humanistic side. Like, does Pat accept the change that we're talking about? Will she move forward with it? So there's a transition for people in change, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the tools used. So I put ADKAR model, but as we know, there are many models out there for change. I like the ADKAR model because, number one, I think it's basic and it's very easily transferable to the corporate world. I use it all the time in the corporate environment. The actual readiness assessment, that isn't something we talk about in project management too often because we don't have that listed. That is very important in change management. Readiness assessment will show you what all's going on in the organization now. Is the timing appropriate? Do we have enough of the resources? How do we think people will take to this change? What I hear a lot in corporate America right now is we are tired of change. And sometimes I truly believe it's the timing of change initiatives, especially global, or not global, but whole system approaches. When you have initiative after initiative after initiative, and they're all kind of sitting on top of each other, you're going to wonder why your employees are saying, we're getting tired of change. So that's something we really have to watch. The comprehensive communication plan and strategies. Again, in project management, we go to the statement of work, we go to the project charter, we go to the business case, the milestones, the budget. In change management, we have to have a comprehensive communication plan and strategies in place before we start educating on what the initiative is, why do we need to roll this out, what positive impacts are we going to have. And that communication plan seems to be one of the critical pieces that, again, some organizations don't do well with, because the cadence of communication has to go from the top through the bottom of the organization. And sometimes we forget to go to those lower sections of the organization, and they are the end users. So we really need to make sure that that communication plan expands from the top to the bottom. And then a training plan. This is a piece that's missed quite often too, because training is an afterthought. Training can't be an afterthought in change management. That is a big piece, so that when you're going through your change management and you are looking at all the different pieces, the people involved who will be impacted by that change, we have to know what kind of training plans we need if we have to upskill individuals now. So those are some of the differences that I like to point out. Elements of change management, and we have a longer list, but I like this particular slide in a graphic approach. So step one, understanding the need for change, the why. So I did point out that Simon Sinek does a fabulous job on his YouTubes of explaining that why a change initiative is going to happen. Identifying all stakeholders, extremely important, from your sponsor to everyone else. And you'll see that I show a tool that I particularly use to make sure that I understand that I've looked at all the stakeholders that I need to with the change initiative. 3, build that comprehensive communication plan. That's the what. What are we changing? How will we change it? What will it do for the organizations? So that is a lot of the step 3. Step 4, give support to effective individuals. One of the things that I think is a challenge is we sometimes get a pretty good sponsor sponsoring us for a change initiative. They may get busy, they may get pulled, but we still need their support on different parts of the change initiative. So the who and the what, it is important to, in that communication plan, to make sure that you are having weekly meetings with that sponsor, or that there's some type of dashboard out there where that sponsor can always go out and see where we are with the change initiative, and what's happening with it. And then monitoring and evaluation. Big piece. When you're talking about change management and change management initiatives, one of the things that could falter is we forget to stop and celebrate the small wins as we're moving along. For instance, one of the scenarios I was going to share with you, and I will now, is I worked for an organization and we were changing our human resource management system. We had a very antiquated system that we had in place for like 20 years, and we were moving it over to Workday. So that was a system-wide initiative that was going to impact all of the employees in some way or another. So monitoring and evaluating after we implemented the system, to hear feedback from everyone and to make sure that if we needed to go back and we needed to change something, tweak something, redevelop a piece of the HRM system, we could do that. But it also talks about the when and the why. So we would allow them time to test the system, and then to kind of let them know, okay, this particular piece is going live on such and such a date. So those are the key elements that I like to point out. There's many involved, many. In my head, when I first started, excuse me, in my head, when I first started trying to figure out and separate project management from change management, I put this list together. It's not real pretty. I'm not a techie as far as design, but I just put these 2 rows against each other. And when you look at the change management activity row, you will see that it includes a lot of elements of that humanistic side. So conducting the readiness assessment, where we go out and we really are wondering if the organization is ready for this type of change at this particular point. There are many readiness assessments out there. So all you have to do is Google. And I'm sorry, I don't like to do this, but I'm going to have to take a little drink of my coffee. So there's lots of readiness assessments out there. Just make sure that you do one of them so that you can at least test the water on how ready the organization is for this change. Identifying and anticipating resistance. So again, resistance is something that you get with change management that you may not get with project management. But change management and resistance, you can't just try to sweep resistance under the rug. We all know that there's a process that we go through when there is a change being made. And we start off with that first cycle of ending, losing, letting go. And then we move into this middle section of the neutral zone. Okay, I'm not sure if I'm for this change yet, or, if I'm going to accept it and move on, be an early adapter of that particular change, or is that, and then follow through to that new beginning. I've accepted the change. I love it. I'm using it. It's now part of my day-to-day work. So I'm not going to read all of these. You can certainly go through them and see which ones may affect some change initiative that you have going on. But again, I think it's just a balance of understanding project management, change management. The why behind uh, change management fails. So we're going to go through this first, and then we'll go into some helpful hints so that you don't get stuck in this management fail stage. Misunderstanding of the human elements. What happens a lot in corporate America and academia, if you're doing change in academia, is that we automatically know someone has identified something that needs to change. In my scenario, one of the upper echelon of the organization went to a conference and decided, came back, we need Workday. That's great. But did we understand that changing this particular system is a change that is going to affect every employee? And we had at that point about 33,000 employees. So, a little bit of a bigger company. And do we know the impact of that? So that was one thing I don't think we did well with this initiative. Poor communication. If that communication plan is not in place, that comprehensive communication plan that goes from the top to the bottom, that will definitely hurt your initiative success. So you really need to work with your marketing folks also and stay closely with them, because they can help you sometimes not to forget a certain group of individuals, or they can help you see a cadence of different communication modes. So stay with your marketing individuals also, so that communication stays pretty well. Build that dashboard for the communication so that employees can also go in there and see where you are with this initiative. Lack of stakeholder engagement. The sponsor, I believe, is really, really the key person that needs to work with those all stakeholders before the initiative even begins, to call them in. Let's sit down and let's talk about the initiative and why it's necessary, because you don't want stakeholders not understanding why the initiative is really important to the organization, because then they won't support it, and then they can't really communicate a positive outlook for their employees. So the sponsor really should be on top of that at all times. Estimating the scale. We certainly underestimated the scale with the human resource management system. We needed so many of the departments, including IT, involved in a very heavy basis. And I think we didn't do as well as we could have with workload to resourcing for those people who had to lead the different elements of that, building that system out. So that was another piece that I'm not sure we had our arms around before we started. And then inadequate leadership support. So again, if there were a couple of times where we were really vying for the same people, the same resources, and we would come to kind of a challenging spot where we needed more resources. That was the bottom line, is we needed more people, more hands-on for different things that we were doing with this change initiative. And if you can't get the right support from leadership, that is a huge challenge. So those are some of the more critical pieces I've seen that lead to change management failure. What should leaders do to set up or streamline? Again, I'm not going to read each one of these because of the time element today, but I thought I'd pull in just some of the pieces, and some of the pieces we just went over. But communicate the why. Extremely important. Strong sponsor for building the commitment for all leaders. So that sponsor is really, really critical. access the capacity of all employees to work on or assess the capacity. So we weren't, I can honestly say, I don't think I was invited to lead. I was more told to lead the talent development piece of Workday. Um, and it was extremely challenging trying to do my full-time job and to lead that effort. I did it because I was told to do it, but I think it's important to assess the capability and the time management of individuals who have to lead the efforts. Assess the readiness of the organization. We talked about build a strong team of members with diversified skill sets. You want diversity within these teams especially when it is a whole system transformation piece that's happening here. You want diversified members on that team from all the different areas of the organization. Build a comprehensive communication plan. We talked about that already. Develop training aids as they are identified through the project. Don't wait until you are almost done developing the pieces of the puzzle, the system, before you start developing the actual training guides for upskilling of individuals that need it. Address resistance as proactively. Yes, don't try to sweep those resistors under the rug. I like to pull them out front so that we can discuss, why they are resisting. There are many reasons why people resist, so we need to understand what this resistance is all about. For instance, with the human resource management system, we had some tenured folks that had been using that system that we used for 20 years. They were now going to have zero knowledge of a new system. So they went from being, the superstars of the old system to actually feeling like, I know nothing about this system. Well, we have to help them through that transition. And it goes back to the why, it goes back to what this will do for us. We will now have capability of doing this, this, and this. It'll streamline a lot of processes, so on and so forth. So you have to have those true discussions. And then track success and celebrate small wins. Very important when you have larger change initiatives that last like a year and a half at a time, 2 years at a time. You have to remember to still celebrate those wins as you move along. So let's talk about the successful change management process. So preparation, engage stakeholders early on in the actual process. Planning, develop a detailed plan including risk management processes. So what happens if you lose an individual that was leading a particular piece of this change initiative? And that did happen. We lost a couple of really good employees because of the frustration and just burnout. Implementation, follow the plan, the communication plan, and the feedback plan, and then prevent backsliding. So once the initiative is implemented, you have to make sure that you have discussed how you will get people back on track if they just decide this is too much work, I can't do it, I can't learn it. What's the game plan? And reward those champions. Find those people who are the early adopters of this particular initiative and really put them as superstars to go out there and start being an extension of training and educating on why this is so critical that we do, but also it streamlines process, makes my day-to-day workload much better. So you have to find those. And then project post-mortem. One of the things that we forget to do sometimes with change initiatives is to still go back and do the lessons learned. What could we have done better? How do we make this sustainable now? How are we going to evaluate to see that we are getting the outcomes and the KPIs we wanted from this particular change initiative? So that is some of the steps I think that you can do to prepare yourself for more positive outcomes. Frameworks and tools. Again, I think one of the first things that I like to do in my head is that we need to actually build a skeleton of why this is necessary. So this actually came from ProSci also, but I take this piece of paper and I start just writing down or bulleting things so that I can get a clearer mind of what and how to start this. So I just put the project name and sometimes the definition, the purpose, why are we actually doing this change? Particulars, what are we changing? So what all will change? And then people. Again, you see that people for change management. Who all will be impacted? Who all will be sponsors? Who will be the leaders? And I kind of break it down into the different groups there. But who will be involved here? One of the, I stated this before, but the framework that I use the most is the ADKAR model from ProSci, because I think it's the easiest to understand and to transfer over to other employees or people doing the change initiative or change management initiative. So we start off with an awareness, and that's just really understanding, getting the employees to understand why the initiative is important and what will happen if we don't make this change. What's the risk and impact to the organization if we don't make this change? The desire is really just persons desire to wrap their arms around this change. So how do we do that? How do we help people really embrace the change and adopt the change? Because we have to understand that, again, humanistically, everybody kind of embraces things differently. Sometimes the timing is different. Sometimes it may take me a little longer to embrace something than someone else. So we have to think about all those. The knowledge, what knowledge do the employees have on the change initiative itself? When I said CRM, I don't know who all understands CRM or not, but the HR management system, I had to literally remember to say this particular system is now going to replace, and they would understand the old system, Lawson, that we had. So they could connect the dots and say, oh, okay, so this is going to be used for. But then I had to explain that Lawson was very, very outdated for us. So we had to make sure that we included things like we are now going to be able to put our yearly goals for employees in our system. We're going to do our whole evaluation in this system. We're going to be able to change benefits in this system. So giving them the knowledge up front as much as you can about what the system will be once we're done with it. The ability. So someone has to give feedback to the employees that are affected, both the people that are doing the change management initiative piece and to the employees who have to accept testing the system and stuff like that. So when we think about ability, someone may struggle. So we have to have something in place to say, okay, Pat is struggling with XYZ. Do we have a training aid built? Do we need this training aid before the system really, runs through and is actually live? So ability is very important to understand. And then again, the resource or the reinforcement, that's really, really important. I've seen too many change initiatives fail, and people want to start pointing the fingers at each other. But what we have to understand is we have to think about that before we put a system live. How will we put the system in place, make it live, monitor how well it's going, get the feedback from the organization on what's working well and what's not working so well, so we don't get so frustrated we just quit. And you do see change initiatives sometimes just drop off the map because we haven't put certain things in place. One of the other tools that I use is a RACI chart, and this comes from project management. But a RACI chart really gets into the people side. So responsible. So responsible is anybody that is giving that is given task or responsibility to put in place with this change initiative. The accountable person is the person that at the end of the day, if things aren't going well, if this project isn't moving forward or isn't doing what we anticipated, the accountable person is the person they go to. Your sponsor is going to go to the accountable person and say, hey, tell me a little bit about where this project is. Why are we off track? Why are we behind schedule? Consulted, and this happened a lot with the HRM system, was that because it was a system-wide change, there were a lot of people that needed to be consulted. So people from payroll, people from IT, people from medical records, people from all over the health system. So we had to make sure that everyone that was listed on that consultant type of list, that we were communicating with them on a regular basis so that they could kind of steer us in the right direction. They are actually sometimes the knowledge behind why we either do or do not do something in that particular space. And then informed. So who are the individuals that just need to be informed? And usually in that particular list, you'll find the stakeholders, leadership team, people like that in the informed. But if you look under RACI, you will see how to set your spreadsheet up. I usually just use Excel to set it up. But you also could use the project management phases on the left-hand side and then the RACI across the top. So there's many ways of developing it, but I just like it. It keeps me on track. I don't forget about people that should be in the initiative to begin with. So just another tool that I use for more successful outcomes. So what are some of the trends and positive outcomes that you will see if you follow the right steps in change management? One, the employees are much more involved in the overall decision-making elements. That really gets them to engage with the initiative so that they don't stay any longer than they have to in that first transition stage of change, where they can let go of the old. They can begin to move into the neutral phase. So they're much more engaged. And that's the only way I need to put that, is they do begin right away to be much more engaged. 2, change management frameworks foster adaptability and flexibility in the overall change process. That is absolutely true. If you go through the steps that I've listed, you will be more prepared for anything that needs to change as you move along the time frame, as you move along with people, as you move along with the system. 3, leaders feel more empowered to lead change initiatives. When you do a really good job with the communication plan, leaders get involved earlier, and they also will begin to understand the why earlier and see the positive outcomes we really will see as an organization. So leaders do feel more empowered to lead the change when they understand what it is, why it is, what kind of outcomes very early on. Change management frameworks give opportunity for growth. So in the CRM initiative, we actually were able to upskill some people that were early adopters, and really that was an opportunity for them, but it was also an opportunity for the organization to have the right superstars in place, which fostered more of a positive culture through the organization, because that we had enough people then out there in the organization that they could go to if they were challenged by the new system in any way. And then, of course, the last one, again, I can't say enough about this. You have to think about how you are operationalizing that change initiative, so this sustainability for the organization will be there. That can't be an afterthought or the last thought you think about before you hit the live switch on the system. So those are some of the trends in workforce related change management. Okay. I apologize. Again, I wanted to try to get through all my slides, but I will take any questions that we have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Macko. We have two questions in the Q&A. I can read it to you, or if you can look at it. So the first one, I appreciate the example you used throughout today's webinar. I worked in employee education in one of the administrations of the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I'm part of a group tasked with managing a move to a new learning management system that will be part of a new HR management system being selected. In hindsight, what one lesson learned from your experience with the Workday adoption would have had the biggest impact on your success?
That's a great question and an easy one for me to answer. There were many things I might have done a little differently. But in Workday has so many different parts of their system. They have the benefit, they have the learning, they have the human relation type of area. What we didn't do was say, what are the most important things that we need, and prioritize those. When we started out, we were going to try to work on all the different areas of Workday at once. So your organization has to take a look at what are the most prioritized areas. Is it the ability to get payroll and benefits and that piece developed? Because you have to design all those parts and then you have to implement, test, get those done. It sounds so easy, but it's really, really difficult. So what we didn't do was prioritize. So we were pulling so many resources for not only leading the different areas of Workday, but people who actually understood developing from like a more IT level, where if we put this system in place, is this system going to be able to communicate with it? So again, I can make it sound easy, but it wasn't. So what I would have done was to try to get the organization to really say, let's do that matrix or that timeline that says in year one, we are only going to work on X piece. We're going to get that developed. In year two, then we will start to develop the performance evaluation system. In year whatever, the talent development and management piece of that system. So don't tackle the whole elephant at one time because it will stampede you easily. Don't let it do that to you.
Thank you so much. Another question, how do you get to agreement on the RACI roles? My recent experience is that employees won't be consulted as system change is being built, but are often in the informed category instead.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. That's one of the biggest downfalls is, and I think I mentioned that at the beginning, sometimes the end users are employees. And what we want to do is we want to keep everything at such a high level until we have to share it with employees. We have to get all levels involved in the actual change management initiative at the beginning. And when I say that, I mean at least a representative of each area at all different levels. Like we couldn't send out and include all 33,000 employees in what we were doing on a day-to-day basis to build out this system to make the changes. But you have to make sure that the leaders, so you have your sponsor and then you're going to have a leader of every area, that they have taken a view of and reviewed all the employees in their particular area to say, Pat is the best person to lead this part of this initiative. Or Pat understands the payroll system the best. So when we have questions, she can be consulted, and then she can share with the rest of her employees what that question was so that she doesn't forget anything either. So then the other employees kind of feel like they're involved, but not on a day-to-day basis. So you can't include everyone, but you do. It's very, very critical to understand who those individuals are that can communicate well, can translate sometimes technical information to the other employees. Very, very important. If there's scuttles or challenges with who on your team should be that lead, I leave that up to the leader of the whole area, whether that's a VP, a director, or whatever. As a consultant, I don't really get involved in when there's kind of challenging back and forth on who knows the most. As a consultant, I don't always know that. So I depend on the internal leaders to kind of make that decision, but make sure that it's understood that it's just you were a person chosen. All employees will get their opportunity for feedback. They will all get their opportunity at some point. So, but that is a tough one. It is a tough one.
Thank you so much. We still have like a couple of questions before we end. So the other question said, how would you define the key steps for driving mindset change as part of change management, and how can leaders ensure those shifts are consequently adopted across the organization?
Yeah, two things. One is I was very surprised with this organization that they did not have any type of change management education program in place, whether that was through leadership programs or just one-off programs. They never had that. So they were used to working on projects, but they weren't educated and ready for change management. So one of the first things we had to do in the OD department was to build out an educational session on what is change management. So, and we had all leaders had to take the program so that they can then prepare and decide who else needs to go through this particular training. And we did it as an online training so that people could take it when they had time. Um, and we had a list of frequently asked questions, so on and so forth. So that's one piece. That educational piece has to be up front. You can't just go in and say, "Hey, now I understand a little bit more about change management. So here's some of the steps." I mean, there has to be a true in-depth understanding of change management and how people are involved with change management. So creating some type of education for staff to take a look at, whether that they're higher level individuals or entry level individuals, it doesn't matter. We all need to understand the process of change management. And then that actually is really good for your personal skills. You know, you go through change in your personal life. This helps you in your personal life too. Um, so that was the first piece. I forget now what you said on the last piece. What was the last piece? How do you get leaders to make sure that they are held accountable? I'm going to hold them accountable first, that they're accountable for implementing the change, but also really observing the change, giving correct feedback. We put this as part of leadership's evaluation. So there was a spot on the evaluation for adapting to new change. So when we talked about which areas were still really, really struggling with the HRM and why, it usually, and I hate to say this, but it usually went back to leaders. Leaders didn't embrace the change. Leaders didn't find time for their employees to test the systems the way that they were supposed to. And this was all communicated out to the leaders. They just didn't do what they were supposed to do. So on their evaluations, there would be something that says, you know, needs to do a better job with or improve in the area of change initiative and give them an example. So that's how we held them accountable.
Okay, another one said, thank you for sharing this information. You talk about building a dashboard so people can see where we are in the terms of the change. What information have you found helpful to keep in front of leaders? Elements of change readiness, such as sentiment or training knowledge, elements of the change assessment, such as impact, perceptions, magnitude, or something else.
So, depending on where you are with the dashboard, are you going to use a dashboard after the implementation? Or are we speaking about a dashboard that's going to show all the employees and the organization where we are with building out the initiative or completing the initiative? So, if we're talking about completing the initiative, we would have a dashboard that shows them what phase we are in the project, when certain things would happen, so on and so forth. If you're talking about a dashboard once the system goes live and you want to start measuring KPIs and stuff, that's a whole different dashboard. But those KPIs, key performance indicators, need to be discussed in the initial discussion of the why we are doing this. What outcomes will we see? So, for instance, one of the KPIs was how many employees completed their evaluations. Well, in the performance evaluation piece of Workday, there was a report that could be completed every week, every month, however often you wanted it. And that would be a KPI that we would put on the dashboard. So there's two dashboards. There's the dashboard for when you're actually starting the initial elements of change management and more of the project management side, laying over top of it. And then there's the dashboard that's going to keep track of those KPIs.
Thank you so much. The last question, you mentioned readiness assessment. Can you share a practical example of a readiness question or indicator that readily predicted resistance, and how you use that finding to change your strategy before implementations?
Yeah, so you're going to use the readiness assessment well before the implementation of the live system, right? You're going to use the readiness assessment up front. Off the top of my head, I want to be careful with what type of questions I throw out there because, again, there are many, many readiness assessments online. You can literally Google it and see. But it depends on what you're trying to find out. Are you trying to find out, for instance, how many whole system initiatives do we have going on at this point? And is this the right timing? You could build a question off of that, right? The other thing is maybe resources. Do we have the right resources in place before we even get started? If we know that we need new positions because of the way this system is going to be working, and we have to upskill people, we already know we need to upskill them because here's the competency differences between the last system and this system, then that assessment would be more of a competency type question. So if you find these readiness assessments online, you're going to notice sometimes they break out the questions in different sections. So depending on what you are trying to really narrow down to will depend on the actual question that you ask. It is sometimes difficult for leaders to answer the questions correctly. And what I mean by that on a readiness assessment is sometimes we think we are much better as human beings in a particular area than we really are. So if you have to be careful if you use like a Likert scale of 1 to 5, how much knowledge do our employees have on X? Sometimes those leaders are going to give themselves more credit on what the employees know, and they really don't. So you really have to understand readiness assessments. So I would do my research on particular readiness assessments. If you're using a consultant at all, external consultant, they usually have a lot of these assessments that they can show you. Though they will take you through a series of questions to really make sure that you are assessing the right elements at that particular point. So I know those aren't direct questions or a direct answer, but there's a lot involved in readiness assessments.
Thank you so much, Dr. Macko. On behalf of our Organization and Development and Change Workforce Program, we hope that you enjoyed the session today. If you don't get your questions, please send us an email or reach out to the presenters directly via email. For the future webinar, we would like to hear your feedback on today's webinar. Please take the survey using the link in the chat box or scanning the QR code. Our next webinar is about Radical Purpose for Good, AI and the Future of Work by Dr. Edward Corbel on May 29th from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern timing. Registration for all events are free and can be found on our website. You can also find us on our social media platforms such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter or X. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon. Have a good day and a good night to our guests from other time zones. Thank you so much.